more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Good evening, and may the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. It is one of the most important subject that we need to study concerning the predicted event, the 144,000 going out of Egypt. And this is our first episode on this subject. Now, so let's read 1SR page 101. It has been made clear that Israel after the flesh is a photograph of Israel by the promise. In the Exodus movement, all the tribes went out of Egypt. If this is a photograph of Israel by the promise, then all the 12 tribes must come out now as well. 12 tribes must escape the ruin of Ezekiel chapter 9, death of the firstborn, and Isaiah 63, the Red Sea. The number of them is said to be 12,000 from each tribe, making a total of 144,000. So that is very plain. It was predicted beforehand that all of them, the constituent of the 144,000 living saints, they left Egypt. They abandoned Egypt. Therefore, to be among that special number or special company, we need to prepare for that event. Let's read 1SR page 64. This experience of the Israelites in departing from Egypt was written for the instruction of those who should live in the last days. Before the overflowing scourge shall come upon the dwellers of the earth, the Lord calls upon all who are Israelites indeed to prepare for that event. So we need to prepare for that event, brothers and sisters. But first of all, we need to ever remember that the Bible plainly told us in Hosea chapter 12, verse 13, and by a prophet the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. Hosea 12, verse 13, and by a prophet the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. Hosea chapter 12, verse 13. Now, Let us ponder deeply, brothers and sisters. And we need to deal it seriously, this very important subject. I would like to read this reading in 2TG 22, page 26. 2TG number 22, page 26. It says, let's read. Now is everyone's chance to decide to be either on the one side or on the other. Either to reform and to be led by the faithful great horses, or to cling to the self-important race of horses and stay by them in the south country, there to perish. There is indeed a momentous decision to be made by every member of the covenant. Calls for action in time. Now, let us study closely, brothers and sisters, this paragraph. Immediately, I know the Bidian will apply it to the Seventh-day Adventist leadership, the grizzled horses. But I would like to read that statement. And 1 SR 150. It says, instead of applying it to other people and times, and thereby diverting the instructions intended for the church. Now, I would like to apply this quotation in our times. And let us now study closely if the grizzled horses could not be applied among us shepherd's rod believers. There is no dispute to the fact that it was applied by B.T. Hotep in his days. But it always reminds me the statement in manuscript release, volume 7, page 417, that the prophets spoke less in their time than in our days. Let's read the statement in manuscript release, volume 7, page 417. Now let's read the statement. It says, I would like to. Never are we absent from the mind of God. God is our joy and our salvation. Each of the ancient prophets spoke less for their own time than for ours, so that their prophesying is in force for us. Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 11. Not unto themselves, but unto us they did minister the things which are now reported unto you by them that have preached the gospel unto you with the Holy Ghost, sent down from heaven, which things the angels desire to look into. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 12. Manuscript Release, Volume 7, page 417. And for sure, B.T. Hotep is included. All the prophets who died, in reality, all their prophesyings is in force to the last generation of men. And that is the saints that will no longer to taste that. Now let us study now closely, brothers and sisters. We know that the types is very clear that it is Pharaoh that did not allow God's people to abandon Egypt. In Exodus chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, and afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus said the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. Exodus chapter 5, verse 1 and 2. Now here the shepherd's rod is plainly telling us, brothers and sisters, I would like to read 1 SR on page 69. It says, Pharaoh type of. If Joseph typified Christ, and Pharaoh honored Joseph above any man ever honored by any king, and Joseph and Pharaoh work hand in hand, then Pharaoh must stand for some figure or type. It would not be hard to determine what Pharaoh represents. That which honored Christ above everything that can be honored upon earth is what Pharaoh represents. The church of the apostles honored Christ above everything that can be honored. So much so that all sacrificed their lives. No greater homage has Christ received upon earth by any other part in the history of his church. By this we understand that Pharaoh represents the apostles' church or organization. The application made here will prove correct as we advance in this study. Further explanation upon this subject is given on the last page of this section. Now, the voice of inspiration is plainly telling us the shepherd's rod is very plain by telling, brothers and sisters, that the first antitypical Pharaoh, while Joseph was still alive in Egypt, that was represented by the Apostolic Church, according to the voice of inspiration. I would like to read first this reading. And one as are on page 116. It says, the 430-year period by Abraham did not have to do only with ancient Israel, but with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as well. So let us now focus to the lives of these three men. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now here in one as our packet edition, we already read that statement. I would like to read again. In one as our packet edition on page 56, it says, the eye focused to the light of heaven sees that Jehovah God, the super artist, has employed in the scriptures every method known to mankind by which to unfold the wondrous structure of redemption. And now while leading his people to the kingdom eternal, he employs for light on their way even typology. The lives of men who have gone before and the experiences through which they have passed and decrees that their defeats and victories should be the saints' stepping stones over every pitfall. I would like to focus to the statement, the lives of men who have gone before. And we already read this concerning Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Brothers and sisters, let me read to you in the 1888 message. Let's read the statement and let's ponder deeply. Here in the General Conference Daily Bulletin, it says, Isaac was the promised seed. Isaac was the promised seed. And just think, Isaac never was in Egypt. You remember that? There was a famine in Egypt. And he started to go there. But the Lord said to him, do not go into Egypt. And it says, Abraham was in Egypt. Sarah was in Egypt. Israel was in Egypt. But Isaac never was in Egypt. He was the child of promise, born of the Spirit from the beginning. Again, we read. Now, it's very important to understand the lives of these three men, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the most important part in their lives is that only Abraham and Jacob, as well as Sarah, that was in Egypt. But Isaac never was in Egypt. And secondly, Isaac had been told by God, do not go into Egypt. Now, unto whom does the life of Isaac did typify? So that is very important, brothers and sisters, to study closely. That we need to study carefully. I remember that reading in tract number 12. Let me read to you. Here in tract number 12, the statement given by the shepherd's rod. And I would like to apply that statement in this study. Tract number 12 on page 64 and page 65. In the light of these foregone fundamental facts, we should now be able to rightly evaluate the unfolding of the scroll and to intelligently match the page of prophecy with the page of history. I would like to read again. Tract number 12, page 64 and page 65. In the light of these foregone fundamental facts, we should now be able to rightly evaluate the unfolding of the scroll and to intelligently match the page of prophecy with the page of history. Tract number 12, page 64, and page 65. So let us now evaluate the page of history and the page of prophecy. Or in other words, brothers and sisters, let us distinctly separate those events which only the groundwork and those events by which it is the particular object in view. Now, let us read again tract number 5, page 34. It says, fulfilled prophecies are seen, therefore, to be employed by the scriptures only as groundwork for that part of prophecy which is yet to be fulfilled. In page 32, it says, the statements which must shortly come to pass, Revelation 1, verse 1, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter, Revelation 4, verse 1, go to say that the revelation is given with the one particular object in view of showing the things lying not behind, but ahead of John's time, with reference being made only incidentally to the past, in order to lay the necessary foundation upon which to build the future. Tract number 5, page 32. So, the reason that God employed the groundwork is to build the necessary foundation, or it is necessary to have foundation so that we could easily comprehend the particular object in view. Now, let us now study closely and distinctly separate those prophecies that already been fulfilled, which is the groundwork, and those prophecies which are still unfulfilled. The shepherd's rod made it so plain in 2SR 275. It says here, you will also note on page 222 that the 430 prophetic years originally applied to Abraham and his seed overlap the 430 of Ezekiel chapter 4. The 430 years of Ezekiel should terminate in 1929 or 1930. But the perfect fulfillment of the prophetic period of Abraham in its antitype is yet in the future, going out of Egypt. The chart on page 212-213 shows its termination in 1930, for as we stated before, it is outlined by the coincidences which perfectly fit the prophecy of Ezekiel. As it is impossible to make a time chart without any date to go by, we have used these coincidences, and it is stated that the date is indefinite. See the chart on page 133. And it says, Ezekiel's prophecy is intended to point forward to the announcement of the predicted reformation and the one through Abraham to its completion, Ezekiel 9. Now, that statement, Ezekiel prophecy, brothers and sisters, I think it is more definitely pointing to the Shepherd's Rod publications. Now, I would like to apply this reading immediately to the particular object in view. The Shepherd's Rod publications, whatever prophecy recorded into this book, it is intended to point forward to the announcement of the predicted reformation. What reformation? That is pointing to that predicted event, Israel going out of Egypt, or the 144,000 going out of Egypt. That is the completion of the predicted reformation, brothers and sisters. And that is the reason why the Shepherd's Rod says we need to prepare for that event. Now, I would like to read this reading. Let me read to you the statement given by the voice of inspiration. It says here, still in General Conference Daily Bulletin, it says, let us turn to the commandments of God and look at them a moment in the 20th of Exodus. If any further evidence was wanted that we are yet under the influence of Egyptian bondage, certainly this thing is the capship that fixes the evidence. Till very lately, you and I never saw a copy of the Ten Commandments issued by the Seventh-day Adventists that had all the Ten Commandments in it. I never did until very lately. And yet we have talked about keeping the commandments. We have preached to other people about the commandments. we have pointed out how Rome has changed the commandments and left out the fourth and divided the tenth, while all the time we ourselves, from our published copies of the commandments, or the ones that we brought that somebody else had published, have left out a part of the commandments ourselves. And it says, God spoke His law from heaven. Did He speak more than belongs with the commandments? Did He speak too much? Did He speak more than was needed? No, for it was perfect. And there was nothing to be added when He ceased speaking. Well then, as there was nothing to be added when He ceased speaking, did He begin before He needed to? As there was nothing to be added when He ceased speaking, is there something before He began to speak directly to us for our good? In other words, did He speak a word too much or a word too little? No, no, no. And it says, let us see then. Let us see then what He said. Here it is. And God spake all these words. It is verse 1 in Exodus 20. And God spake all these words, saying, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Is that where He begins? Does He begin speaking with, Thou shalt have no other gods before me? No. Have you begun there? You know, you have. Well, if God did not begin there, and you and I do begin there, don't we leave out something that He said that is essential for our good too? Where did He begin? Read it. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, the voice of inspiration is trying to emphasize that the spirit of the papacy entered to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Because the intention of the papacy is to destroy the Ten Commandments that was given by the voice of God in Mount Sinai. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church is trying to emphasize that Rome taken out the fourth commandment, brothers and sisters, and then replace. But without knowing, in reality, they themselves have done worse. Because the very first important, the mere fact that God began in that very words, that is the most important part in the Ten Commandments. Let us read Exodus chapter 20. And verse 1. And God spake all these words, saying, and that is what the voice of inspiration is trying to emphasize. And I think that is in Deuteronomy. Says on verse 2, Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish out from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, they started on verse 3, emphasizing the people that that is the beginning of the Ten Commandments, but left out the most important part of the Ten Commandments, verse 1 and verse 2, the preamble of the moral law. Saying, and God spake all these words, saying. So, the statement, all these words, began on verse 2. And God spake all these words, saying. Now, verse 2 had been omitted by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I do fully believe that, no, it is not the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It is Satan. It is the spirit of Satan. And it says, and God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Why is it that God began these words to remind the people that God brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage? Because God is trying to emphasize them that they had not been able to obey the commandments of God while they were still in Egypt. Now let us read Patriarchs and Prophets. Patriarchs and Prophets. Page 757 on the appendix. In the command for Israel's release, the Lord said to Pharaoh, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Let my son go, that he may serve me. Exodus 4, verse 22 and verse 23. The psalmist tells us why God delivered Israel from Egypt. He brought forth his people with joy and his chosen with gladness, and gave them the lands of the heathen, and they inherited the labor of the people, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. Psalms 105, verse 43, 44, and 45. The statement says that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. And it says, here we learn that the Hebrews could not serve God in Egypt. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14 and 15, we find special emphasis given to that portion of the fourth commandment, which requires the manservant and the maidservant to rest. And the Israelite was told to remember that he had been a servant in the land of Egypt. The Lord said, the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine ass, nor any of thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as thou. And remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt. And the Lord thy God brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. In Exodus chapter 5, verse 5, we learn that Moses and Aaron made the people rest from their burdens. Now ponder deeply, brethren. Verse 2 and the fourth commandment is closely connected. Because in the fourth commandment, God reminds them that they were a stranger or they were in bondage in the land of Egypt. Therefore, to omit verse 2 is tantamount to omit the fourth commandment. Why is it that verse 2 had been omitted? Because it is the most important part. If God's people could obey God's commandments in Egypt, then there is no need for God to take them out of Egypt. But David made it so plain that they might obey the commandments and the statutes. In Psalms 105, verse 43, 44, and 45. Now let us read here, brothers and sisters. John Canberra's Daily Bulletin. Don't you see that we have left out the very thing that shows deliverance from Egyptian bondage? And why have we left it out? I would like to read again. It says, don't you see that we have left out the very thing that shows deliverance from Egyptian bondage? And why have we left it out? Oh, because we have considered that we have not been delivered from Egypt. That is so. We have considered that we never were brought out of the land of Egypt, and by our unbelief, that is so. We have thought we were never in bondage to any man. Who declared that? The Jewish people. Right? When Jesus Christ told them, if you will know the truth shall set you free. And they were very angry because they were saying that they were not in bondage. I would like to read that. The statement in Desire of Ages. In 465 and 467. Among his hearers, let us read, 465, Desire of Ages. Among his hearers, many were drawn to him in faith, and to them he said, if ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. These words offended the Pharisees. The nation's long subjection to a foreign yoke they disregard and angrily exclaimed, we be Abraham's seed, and we were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? Jesus looked upon these men, the slaves of malice, whose thoughts were bent upon revenge, and sadly answered, verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committed sin is the servant of sin. They were in the worst kind of bondage, ruled by the spirit of evil. And I think that is the time by which Jesus Christ also declared. And 1 TG I would like to read to you. It was also here in 1 TG, number 2, page 18. 1 TG number 2, page 18. Let us read the statement here, brothers and sisters. It says, and Jesus said, for judgment I am come. That is in John chapter 9, verse 39. And Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they might see, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. Here we are told that Jesus came for judgment, which will cause those that see to become blind, and those that are blind to see. And I think it is closely connected to our subject, Christ's visitation on this earth. This, in reality, this production, or these words of Jesus Christ, will find its direct fulfillment when Jesus Christ will come to this earth. And it says, here we are told that Jesus came for judgment, which will cause those that see to become blind, and those that are blind to see. The expression is peculiar, but the meaning is clear. He came to change every human being, to reverse everyone's situation. Those that are blind to see, and those that do see to become blind. Then it says, let us now judge our own case. If our vision at this moment is the same as always, then plainly enough, His coming has not profited us as yet. If on His visitation, we assume that we already see and know enough, have need of nothing more, and cannot be convinced otherwise, then we shall become blind forever. We will never be able to see what He wishes us to see. But if we admit that we are blind to spiritual things, that our eyes need to be opened, then Christ will make us see. Such will by experience say, once I was blind, but now I see. The blind man's experience must be ours. And that is the basis of the composer of that song, Amazing Grace. Brothers and sisters, this year, although we have a separate subject, but we will prove to you that in this very year, Jesus Christ will visit the earth. I remember the statement in Desire of Ages. Let me see. Concerning the actuality in the days of Jesus Christ, when He uttered those words, brothers and sisters, it says here, Desire of Ages, page 475. The manifestation of divine power that had given to the blind man, both natural and spiritual sight, had left the Pharisees in yet deeper darkness. Because that is the occurrence when Jesus Christ cured the blind man to see. In John chapter 9, right? And Jesus Christ says, I would like to read in the upper part. A group of Pharisees had gathered near, and the sight of them brought to the mind of Jesus the contrast ever manifest in the effect of His words and works. He said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. Christ had come to open the blind eyes, to give light to them that sit in darkness. He had declared himself to be the light of the world, and the miracle just performed was in attestation of his mission. The people who beheld the Savior at his advent were favored with a fuller manifestation of divine presence than the world had ever enjoyed before. The knowledge of God was revealed more perfectly, but in this very revelation, judgment was passing upon men. Their character was tested, their destiny determined. The manifestation of divine power that had given to the blind men, both natural and spiritual sight, had left the Pharisees in yet deeper darkness. Some of his hearers, feeling that Christ's words applied to them, inquired, "Are we blind also?" Jesus answered, "If you were blind, you should have no sin." If God had made it impossible for you to see the truth, your ignorance would involve no guilt. But now ye say, "We see." You believe yourselves able to see, and reject the means through which alone you could receive sight. To all who realized their need, Christ came with infinite help. But the Pharisees would confess no need. They refused to come to Christ, and hence they were left in blindness, a blindness for which they were themselves guilty. Jesus said, "Your sin remaineth." Are we following the footsteps of the scribes and the Pharisees, brothers and sisters? Now let us read again. It says, let's go back to the statement in John Conference Daily Bulletin. It says, "Don't you see that we have left out the very thing that shows deliverance from Egyptian bondage? And why have we left it out? Oh, because we have considered that we have not been delivered from Egypt, and that is so. We have considered that we never were brought out of the land of Egypt, and by our unbelief, that is so. We have thought we were never in bondage to any man, but we were. We were in bondage to ourselves, to the power of sin, to spiritual Egypt. But there is deliverance from Egyptian bondage tonight. And God calls you and me to this deliverance from Egyptian bondage. And He says to you and me tonight, with a voice thundering as it did from Sinai, with the salvation of Jesus Christ in it, "I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Will you come out? Will you allow that He has delivered you from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage? If not, why not?" Now, for sure, the reading is admonishing to left Egypt in spirit, even though that they were still in Egypt. But our subject is more dealing, brothers and sisters, on the actual fulfillment when ancient Israel abandoned Egypt, physically and supposed to be spiritually. Let us first study closely those events. It says here, I would like to read to you concerning the 70 elders. It says, the 70 elders saw God. Yes, they saw God. it is hard to tell, though, about the people being out of Egypt. Moses always was. Even while he was in physical Egypt, he was spiritually out of it. Caleb and Joshua were always spiritually out of Egypt. In the triumphant song of the Red Sea, the whole denomination, I have thought, were spiritually out of Egypt if they had held fast to that. As the Lord said, "Oh, that my people had hearkened unto my voice and walked in my laws, then I would have speedily subdued their enemies under them." But when their faith was tried in the very first step they took, when they were at Mara, where there was bitter water, they threw their faith away and wished they were back in Egypt again. When we come to a bitter experience, shall we take it as an evidence that the Lord has forsaken us? No. Thank the Lord that that bitter experience is for our good, and God is able to turn the bitter into sweet. Now, I would like to emphasize first, brothers and sisters, that even though at the time by which these faithful people of God were still in Egypt, they have never partaken the spirit of Egypt. But let us distinctly separate that event, that even though they had not partaken the spirit of Egypt, there was a time that God commanded them to leave Egypt. And we're focusing to that predicted event by which the shepherd's rod declared clearly that that event, the perfect fulfillment of that event, brothers and sisters, is still future in the days of Bethlehem. Now, I would like to remind again, brothers and sisters, accordingly, concerning the lives of these three men, Abraham, then Isaac and Jacob, only Abraham and only Jacob that were in Egypt. And not only that, according to the voice of inspiration, I would like to read again. Isaac was the promised seed. So the promised seed is Isaac. And just think, Isaac never was in Egypt. You remember that? There was a famine in Egypt, and he started to go there, but the Lord said to him, "Do not go into Egypt." Unlike to Abraham and Jacob, it is God who commanded them, "Go into Egypt." But the divine command to Isaac is that, "Do not go into Egypt." Abraham was in Egypt. Sarah was in Egypt. Israel was in Egypt. But Isaac never was in Egypt. He was the child of promise, born of the Spirit from the beginning. Now, let us read 1 SR and meditate on the subject. Let us read 1 SR 200 27. New Testament, section 1. It says, as Isaac was the firstborn after the Spirit, naturally, he must represent the first section beginning at the cross of Christ. Quoting the words of Paul, he says, now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. Isaac then represents that section from the cross to 1844. As there has been no other call before, the commencement of its previous section, as well as their completion, was marked by an important event. Just so, with the termination of the section represented by Isaac, 1844 is the only fitting time for that section to pass away and usher in the second, at which time the judgment in the heavenly sanctuary began. Evidently, the scroll had to make a turn, and again type meet antitype. Now, the statement is very plain that the first section in the New Testament period is entitled Isaac. Now, it's very plain, brothers and sisters. Now, from 31 AD to 1844, that period is the period entitled Isaac. Isaac never been in Egypt. Brothers and sisters. So if the whole life of Isaac, from the time he was born to the time he died, he was never been in Egypt, then the antitype must be the same. Because type and antitype should exactly fit. Brothers and sisters, according to the voice of inspiration, in the Great Controversy, 399, it says, these events are not fulfilled not only to the event, but as well as to the time. Or in other words, the event. If the event, if the picture, if the photograph that Isaac was never been in Egypt, then the true object, it must be that that period from 31 AD to 1844, they never been in Egypt. Now, I would like to read 12 symbolic code. Number 5. Page 14. But according to Revelation chapter 12, the church was at some time to leave the vineyard, the kingdom, and go into the Gentile world. This phase of the church history is not typified either in Seth or Isaac experience. So in this reading, not only Isaac, but as well as Seth, they never been in Egypt. Only in Jacob's life do we find the type for it. Brothers and sisters, only in the life of Jacob. Now, I would like to read again the statement in 1SR. It says, the 430-year period by Abraham did not have to do only with ancient Israel, but with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as well. Or in other words, within the entire period of the 430 years, in that period of time, it was portrayed the life of Abraham, the life of Isaac, the life of Jacob, as well as ancient Israel. Or pointing to the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes. Now, there must be a type for it. Because B.T. Hotep says, in 1SR page 68, it says, the fact that Israel after the flesh is a type photograph, their experience must be duplicated by the true. Otherwise, there can be no type. So there are 4 entities that it needs to duplicate. Abraham, Isaac, then Jacob, and the 12 tribes. Brothers and sisters. And among these four entities, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes, only Isaac that was never been in Egypt. Brothers and sisters, Abraham, Jacob, and the 12 tribes, they were in Egypt. Now let us read, brothers and sisters, the statement given by the Shepherd's Rod in 1SR. On page 76. The land of Goshen. The beginning of this denomination, we know that was in 1845, right? Because the birth of the Seventh-day Adventists occurred in 1845. Now let us read 1SR page 100. 111. It says here, well, 1SR page 111, it says, the entering into Egypt with 70 souls typified the birth of Seventh-day Adventists, as explained on pages 73 and 74. But Seventh-day Adventism was not born until 1845. Now let us read again. The entering into Egypt with 70 souls typified the birth of Seventh-day Adventists, as explained on pages 73 and 74. But Seventh-day Adventism was not born until 1845. So the birth of Seventh-day Adventists typifying entering into Egypt. And that is why if you will read page 75, it says, Jacob, type of James, pointing to James White. The Seventh-day Adventists, reading page 75 in 1SR. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, which came into existence in 1845, became Israel. The movement from which the true Israel, the 144,000, are made. It will be noticed that the names of the fathers after the flesh and by the promise coincide. The father's name of Israel after the flesh was Jacob. So is the name of the father of Israel by the promise, Seventh-day Adventist movement. But one may say, it was Jacob in the former and James White in the latter. True it is. But the names Jacob and James are the same. Again, the very first vision of Sister White had was about the 144,000, and the aim of this denomination has been to make that number. So we have already the absolute fact that 1845, that is typifying when God commanded Jacob to enter into Egypt. And for sure, brothers and sisters, to obey God's command is not to displease God, would you think? They dishonored God when they implicitly obeyed the command of God to go into Egypt. It was God who commanded Jacob to enter into Egypt. And that event, brothers and sisters, finds its antitypical fulfillment on the birth of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then the Shepherd says here in 1SR page 76, I would like to read again, the land of Goshen stands as a symbol of the United States of America in which the church came into existence. While our country is productive, like the land of Goshen, the richest in the world, and a Protestant nation, it is the best for missionary work, for it is made up of all nations, and therefore, like the land of Goshen, the most productive in Egypt, the world. So, the voice of inspiration says that the land of Goshen, by which were God's people anciently, had been placed by Joseph, is typifying the United States of America, and Joseph is typifying Jesus Christ. That is very plain in this study, brothers and sisters. Now, where is the perfect fulfillment of that predicted event? That God commanded His servant to let Israel go and abandon Egypt. And who is he? The antitypical Pharaoh. Now, I would like to read this reading on page 77. 1SR page 77. Another Pharaoh arose. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Exodus chapter 1 verse 8. If the first Pharaoh who exalted Joseph Christ represented the leadership in the days of the apostles, then this new Pharaoh must represent the leadership of this present movement at the time this subject became known. Note, this new Pharaoh knew not Joseph Christ. The meaning is that the leadership of this organization have left following their master Christ. And I think all of us will agree that the leadership mentioned here is the leadership of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Then logically, Pharaoh is the president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, if Pharaoh represents the president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, then spiritual Egypt, brothers and sisters, at the time when this another Pharaoh arose, must be only the entire denomination of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Because the president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, he has no jurisdiction of those people not under the dominion of the Seventh-day Adventist Church denomination. So if ancient Pharaoh, he has an absolute command, all the constituents under his dominion, which is the literal Egypt, then for sure, in this study, when that Pharaoh by which he did not recognize Joseph is pointing to the president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, then spiritual Egypt, brothers and sisters, it must be pointing to the Seventh-day Adventist denomination by which the command, in which the command under that denomination emanates from the president of the General Conference. Because it is illogical that the type Pharaoh of old, he has an absolute authority to all the constituents under his dominion, which is the kingdom of Egypt. And then the antitype, brothers and sisters, he has no jurisdiction to his own dominion. Therefore, to repeat again, in this predicted event, that this Pharaoh, the another Pharaoh, was represented by the president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, then unto whom he has an absolute authority, he has a command, must be the spiritual Egypt. And the only people that under his jurisdiction to his command is the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. Therefore, that is the spiritual Egypt, the entire Seventh-day Adventist denomination. I would like to read, one is our packet edition. Here in page 45 and page 46. It says, by parallel logic, this new Pharaoh, who knew not Joseph, and who sought to destroy the Lord's people, the Israelites, typifies a master enemy, none other than Satan, a false god, the usurper of this world, who knows not Christ, and who seeks to enslave his people, the Christians, while they are sojourning in antitypical Egypt. One is our packet edition, page 45. So the bottom line of this new Pharaoh, in reality, is Satan himself. Brothers and sisters, and Satan wants God's people to stay in Egypt and there to perish. It is illogical, brethren, to apply that statement saying, I think, the statements in 2TG 22:26. To stay in the south country, to stay in Egypt. At the time when God, there is no command to leave Egypt. Brothers and sisters, to repeat again, according to track number 14, I would like to read the statement. It says here, track number 14, page 6. The third clue is that the one power being called Assyria has a hereditary title, which reveals that it is the modern counterpart of the one widespread empire of ancient Assyria. Even as modern Babylon of Revelation 17, verse 5, is the modern counterpart of ancient Babylon, and as spiritual Egypt of Revelation 11, verse 8, is the modern counterpart of ancient Egypt. All of these counterparts, then, are but another scriptural intimation and confirmation of the age-old truth that history repeats itself and on a much broader scale than in the original. We know the original is the type. Therefore, the particular object in view, which is the antitype, is more broader in scale than in the original. Track number 14, page 6. Brothers and sisters. Now, in the antitype, for sure, brothers and sisters, all the admonition given by Sister White and also B.T. Hotep in their lifetime is not the fulfillment of that predicted event, that 144,000 will abandon Egypt. The first reason is that the 144,000 did not exist in their lifetime. Second, they were living in a time typifying God's people in Egypt, because the prophet himself says that the perfect fulfillment of Israel going out of Egypt was still future in the days of B.T. Hotep, 2SR 275. Therefore, we can easily understand that their admonition is, even though that they were still in Egypt, even though that they were in Egypt, they need to get out Egypt spiritually. They would not be partaken on the spirit. The same what we read, those faithful people of God, even though that they were still in Egypt, but they were free from that Egyptian spirit, brothers and sisters. But the most important thing in this study is the actual event when God commanded His people to leave Egypt, physically as well as spiritually. And this reading in track number 2, page 45. I would like to read this reading. I would like to begin on page 44. Where else in all Christendom, save in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, the Church of the Laodiceans, is to be found the fulfillment of the prophetic church history unfolded in this study? If this startling revelation of present truth, plain and certain, as the conflict itself between good and evil, does not reach the Laodicean heart, then nothing can ever reach it. O brother or sister, be not fooled. If this does not reach your heart now in time to save you from the evil to come, it will surely overtake you eventually, but then only to destroy, not to save you. So stay no longer with the grizzled horses in Egypt, for to do so will be only to perish there with them while the bay take the chariot to the promised land. Brothers and sisters, this statement is definitely applied in our days, in the days in which we are living. And it seems this statement is saying that, no, the spiritual Egypt is none other than the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. Where else in all Christendom save in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination? Among all Christendom, only the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, brothers and sisters, which can typify spiritual Egypt, because all other denominations, except the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, they were called Babylon. We know Babylon and Egypt is not the same. So only in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, we already proved to you, brothers and sisters, that the last Pharaoh is the president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And for sure, logically, the dominion of that Pharaoh must only be the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, because he has no jurisdiction to any people outside the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. So his kingdom must be the spiritual Egypt. And it is illogical that he has no absolute authority in the kingdom by which he is the king. Now let us divert first our study, brothers and sisters, in the life of Jacob, because that is the statement given by the shepherd's rod. It is pertaining to the life of Jacob. And accordingly, brothers and sisters, I would like to read first in 1 SR 106. If the first Pharaoh makes a perfect type of the church leadership in the days of the apostles, then we must accept the last Pharaoh, who knows not Joseph, as a perfect type of the church leadership who have turned from following Christ their leader. Volume 5, page 217. And every one of us knew that it points out to the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. 1 SR page 106 and 107. Now let us focus for a while our attention to the life of Jacob. And for sure, it is closely connected to the woman in Revelation chapter 12. Now let's read again in 12 symbolic ode number 5. It says, page 14, let's read. But according to Revelation chapter 12, the church was at some time to leave the vineyard, the kingdom, and go into the Gentile world. This phase of the church history is not typified either in Seth's or Isaac's experience. Only in Jacob's life do we find the type for it. So, we already read, brothers and sisters, that only Abraham and Jacob was in Egypt. Isaac was never in Egypt. So hear the voice of inspiration that the woman in Revelation chapter 12 was predicted beforehand that she will leave the vineyard and then go into the Gentile world. But what Gentile world does the woman will go? Brothers and sisters. And here the voice of inspiration is very plain in telling us that these occurrences will find only in the life of Jacob. Now it says here, just as it was Esau's persecution of Jacob that caused Jacob to leave Palestine, so also it was the persecution by the unconverted Jews against the Christians which caused them to leave Palestine and go to the Gentile nations. And then it says, it was the line of Seth and Isaac and Jacob that made possible the kingdom of Israel in Palestine. But if the trouble that came between the Christian Jew and the unconverted Jew was the actual cause of the woman's leaving the kingdom and going to the Gentile world, who came into the Gentile world? Was it the Isakites, the Ishmaelites, or the Sethites, or was it some other? It was the Jacobites in the Jacobite period who came to the Gentile world. Therefore, we now see that the church is in the Jacobite period. We also are able to see from the further development of Jacob's type that from this Gentile world, the living church is to return to Palestine just as the Bible promises that it will. 12 symbolic code number 5, page 14 and 15. Now, ponder deeply, brothers and sisters, because the antitype is more broader in scale than in the original. Now, let us read track number 12. On page 43. To begin with, we see from this scripture that the woman left her vineyard, homeland, Palestine, and went into the Gentile world after his child was born. That is in her Christian period, when the dragon persecuted her through the instrumentality of the Jews. Acts chapter 8, verse 1, 13, 46, 50, and 51. It says, next we see that after she was there for some time, conditions become such as to hinder her longer nourishing herself, and that it therefore became necessary that she be nourished by someone for a time, times, and half a time. Now, the shepherd's rod is very plain that the vineyard is Palestine. The vineyard is Palestine. Let us read 2SR. (228). It says, 2SR page 228. Had it not been for the earnest and zealous efforts of these godly reformers, the woman, the church, would have been in the wilderness until this day, and there would have been no Protestantism. This reading plainly indicating that because of the earnest and zealous efforts of these godly reformers, Luther, Knox, with all others, Wesley, Campbell, Cranmer, Latimer, all the earnest and zealous efforts of these godly reformers, it says, if without their earnest and zealous efforts, it says, the woman, the church, would be still in the wilderness today, indicating that because of the godly earnest and zealous efforts by these godly reformers in the days of B.T. Honneth, the woman was already in the vineyard. That's what it means by that statement. Because if you will read Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 to 17, there are only two locations mentioned in that chapter, wilderness and vineyard. Therefore, in the days of B.T. Honneth, the woman was already in the vineyard. Let us read again 2SR. 2SR page 266 and 267. A close study of the type is the only possible way to clear the truth, not only of the foregoing question, but also of the following ones. If the woman was to return from the wilderness to the vineyard civilization after the end of the prophetic period of 1,260 years, what transpired in 1798 to prove that she came back in that year? So the question is, what transpired in 1798 to prove that the woman was no longer in the wilderness in 1798? And then it says, as the imprisonment and death of the Pope answers one side of the question and clears the end of the prophetic period, where is the sign to show that the woman returned from the wilderness? The Shepherd's Rod says that the imprisonment and death of the Pope answers only one side of the questions and clears the end of the prophetic period. That is very plain in this reading. Does the woman return from the wilderness to the vineyard in 1798? Now, I would like to read 2SR page 271. 2SR 271. It says, again, we refer back to the type. 2SR 271. Again, we refer back to the type. With the death of Belshazzar, the captivity of God's people ended, and they were made free. This coincides with the termination of the 1,260 years of the persecution against God's people by the papacy, church and state. the fall of the Babylonian monarchy was not the thing that built the temple in Jerusalem, but it was a preparatory step to it. So, in 536 BC, the fall of the Babylonian Empire. And it says that the fall of the Babylonian Empire was not the thing that built the temple in Jerusalem, but it was a preparatory step to it. As the death of Belshazzar was a preparatory step toward the establishment of a true temple worship, just so the death of the Pope was a preparatory step toward the establishment of a true church worship. But the death of the Pope mentioned here is not just pointing to the Pope that died, pointing to the time when his temporal power had been taken away. Because in the BC study, we already read in 1SR. Let us read. (216). It says, the head that was wounded was not much troubled because a pope had fallen under the sod, nor will it ever be as long as another can fill his place. Because if you will say the death of the pope, in 538 AD to 1798, there are many popes that died. And at the time when the pope died, it was replaced by another pope. So the death mentioned in 1798, in reality, is not to the death of Pope Pius VI, but in reality that at his death, at that time, the temporal power of the Pope was ultimately taken away. So that's what it means here in 1SR 216. Now let us go back again. The same with the Babylonian Empire. From 606 BC, we know the first king who reigned in Babylon is King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar died before the Babylonian Empire was completely ended. So the death of Belshazzar is pointing that at his death, the Babylonian Empire ended. The same with Pope Pius VI. At his death, the papal supremacy ended. Now let's read again the statement. It says, as the death of Belshazzar was a preparatory step toward the establishment of a true temple worship, just so the death of the Pope was a preparatory step toward the establishment of a true church worship. If so, then the type clearly shows that nothing could have happened to the church in 1798 AD to signify that the woman had returned from the wilderness. So the woman was still in the wilderness in 1798. Now here in 1 TG, number 11. 1 TG number 11, page 7 and 8. The prophet Jeremiah's prediction that the Jews were to spend 70 years in Babylonian captivity had ended, although they were still in Babylon. Therefore, when the 70 years captivity ended in 536 BC, the Jewish people were still in Babylon. But since this symbolical prophecy finds its fulfillment in our day instead of in Zechariah's day, the angels plead for mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah, therefore find its direct application in this day. There is, however, this parallel. The time of the Babylonian captivity overlapped some years the time of returning to Jerusalem. In like manner, John's prediction that the church should return to the vineyard after having spent 1,260 years in the wilderness in the lands of the Gentiles Revelation 12 verse 6, had ended and even overlapped since the year 1798, and there was no sign as yet for her returning. So here the shepherd's rod is plainly telling that there is a parallel, a complete parallelism, brothers and sisters. First, during Babylonian captivity, because 1,260 years is also typifying the Babylonian captivity, right? According to 2SR page 271. Let's go back to 2SR 271. It says here, as type destroyed type, so antitype must have destroyed antitype. That is, ancient Babylon, the type of the papacy, robbed and destroyed Solomon's temple, the type of the early Christian church, and led Israel into captivity. This symbolical prophecy meets its perfect fulfillment in 538 AD, when the papacy went forth and destroyed the church, Christian, robbed them of the truth, and led the followers of Christ into captivity, subject to papal rule. So, 606 BC, when 588 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple of Solomon, is typifying the papacy, the commencement of the reign of the papacy in 538 AD, according to that reading in 2SR 271. But we know that it is pertaining to the years, because the Babylonian captivity anciently is only 70 years. But the Babylonian captivity during the Dark Ages is 1,260 years. So what the shepherd's rod is teaching here in 11 symbol 1 TG number 11 pages 5 and 6 is pertaining only to the time when the captivity was ended. That there is a perfect parallelism. That when the 70 years captivity ended, the Jewish people were still in Babylon. In 538 BC, 536 BC rather. And they did not return to Jerusalem not until after 2 years, in 534 BC. The same with the woman in the Babylonian captivity or during the Dark Ages. The woman was still in wilderness in 1798 and did not return to the vineyard not until in 1800 AD. And then the shepherd's rod relate the occurrence in 1888, and it says, and as the denomination was in no condition to accept additional truth, the results are that the church is still in the wilderness, concerning which inspiration said, if the people of God had gone to work as they should have gone to work right after the Minneapolis meeting in 1888, the world could have been warned in 2 years until the Lord, and the Lord would have come. General Conference Bulletin, 1892. It says, the world could have been warned in 2 years, and the Lord would have come. Brothers and sisters, this statement, if you will not study closely, it seems contradictory to 2SR 228, because the shepherd's rod says that if or without the earnest and zealous efforts of these godly reformers, by saying, had it not been by the earnest and zealous efforts of these godly reformers, the church, the woman, would still be in the wilderness even to this day. That reading plainly indicating that in the days of Bethlehem, the woman was already in the vineyard. And what helped the woman to return to the vineyard? The little help recorded in Daniel 11, verse 33 and 34, according to tract number 12, page 80. That is the Reformation, the little help. And with the earnest and the zealous efforts of these godly reformers, the woman from wilderness returned to the vineyard in 1800. Now, to repeat again, this reading in 1 TG number 11, page 8, the same with Alonzo Jones, as well as with Sister White. What the prophet is trying to emphasize, brothers and sisters, is in reality more pertaining to abandon Egypt spiritually, not to be contaminated with the spirit of Egypt. Because at that time, if you will study closely the history and the prophecy, they were still in Egypt. And the Shepherd's Rod made it so plain that the perfect fulfillment of Israel going out of Egypt was still future. If you will apply that statement, that the perfect fulfillment of Israel going out of Egypt was still future in the days of Bethlehem, do we mean that they need to be an Egyptian? Because, brothers and sisters, the perfect fulfillment of going out of Egypt was still future? No, brothers and sisters. Let us distinctly separate the antitypical fulfillment to abandon Egypt, to abandon spiritual Egypt. Brothers and sisters, physically, and the admonition given by God as the lives of these godly men, Abraham, Jacob, the 70 elders, they were in Egypt physically, but they were not in Egypt spiritually, according to the voice of inspiration. But to repeat again, there is an appointed time that God commanded His people to leave Egypt, both physically and spiritually. And we already read, right, that the birth of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1845. That is the antitypical fulfillment when God commanded His people to go into Egypt. So that is the time when God's people were in Egypt, in antitypical sojourn in antitypical Egypt. But our main objective in this study is the time when God commanded His people to leave, abandon spiritual Egypt. And we already proven with absolute fact that the appointed time when God commanded His people to leave Egypt is at the time when another Pharaoh reigned in Egypt. And the Shepherds had made it so plain that another Pharaoh who know not Joseph is pointing to the president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, since the shepherd's rod plainly told us that the woman must left the vineyard and go into the wilderness, and that event is found only in the life of Jacob. Right? The one we read in 12 Symbolic Code number 5, page 14. 12 Symbolic Code number 5, page 14. Now, let us focus a while, brothers and sisters. The actual occurrence when Jacob abandoned the homeland, his father's house, Isaac, and Rebekah. Now let us read the statement here in 1 SR. It says here, 1 SR page 61. Jacob's dream. Jacob, at the advice of his parents, left home and went to Padam Aram, and on his way, the very first night, God appeared unto him in a dream. And behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Genesis 28, verse 12. The ladder represents Christ. God the Father stood above it, Jacob at the foot of it. Verse 13. This dream gave Jacob great courage, and he made a vow to God. Jacob was now to become the father of Israel, the 12 tribes, through whom many nations shall be blessed. A type of Israel by the promise, the 12 tribes, the 144,000. And it says, the dream which he had in the night was only a vision and a representation of some future event. The meaning of the dream can be only one thing. If the ladder represents Christ, the angels as messengers, God the Father at the head, and Jacob at the foot, it means a complete connection with heaven and the true Israel, the latter rain, the loud cry of the third angel's message. See Revelation 18, verse 1. Now let us ponder deeply, brothers and sisters, this predicted event by which the dream of Jacob is only pointing to the future event. Now here in 2SR, page 266, it says, Jacob the father in type of Israel, the true dream on the way to Padam Aram. And behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And he was afraid and said, how dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Genesis 28, verse 12 and 17. Jacob's dream was prophetic of a time when there will be a complete connection and constant communication with heaven and earth, the loud cry of the third angel's message, the harvest time. To that glorious church, these words apply. This is the house of God and the gate of heaven. Only by the gospel proclamation, through that spiritual house, can God save His people. There is to be one fold, one shepherd, one Lord, one truth to embrace, one salvation to accept, one road to travel, one gate to pass through, one train to take, and one time to depart, one heaven to enter, one people, one holy family. There can be no other way. It is impossible to give any idea of the experience of the people of God who shall be alive upon the earth when celestial glory and a reputation of persecutions of the past are blended. They will walk in the light proceeding from the throne of God. By means of angels, there will be constant communication between heaven and earth. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 9, page 16. Now, let us read another statement. Compare all the statements given by the shepherd's rod. Now, I would like to read track number 4, page 48. Before reading track number 4, page 48, I would like to read 1SR Packet Edition. On page let's read. One SR Packet Edition. Pages 33 and page 34, entitled Jacob's Dream. 1SR Packet Edition, pages 33 and page 34. Jacob's Dream. On the first night of his flight from the murderous wrath of Esau, Jacob, using a stone for a pillow, lay down to rest. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Genesis 28, verse 12. It says, what does the dream mean? Being another phase of the same typology, it must necessarily be a prefigurement of a noteworthy event to overtake God's people, the Jacobites. Then it says, since the ladder with one end on earth and the other in heaven symbolizes Christ, Patriarchs and Prophets 184, and since the angels walking up and down the ladder are His messengers, the Great Controversy 512, the whole signifies that Christ shall establish through Himself a sure and constant communication between heaven and earth. And it shall come to pass in that day, I will hear, saith the Lord, I will hear the heavens, and they shall hear the earth. Hosea 2, verse 21. Now, in this reading in 1SR Packet Edition, page 33 and page 34, BT Hotep Connect, Hosea 2, verse 21. But let us read Patriarchs and Prophets 184, and also the Great Controversy 512, because it was quoted in that paragraph. So let us read here in Patriarchs and Prophets 184. In this vision, the plan of redemption was presented to Jacob, not fully, but in such parts as were essential to him at that time. The mystic ladder revealed to him in his dream was the same to which Christ referred in his conversation with Nathanael. Said he, "You shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." John chapter 1 verse 51. Up to the time of man's rebellion against the government of God, there had been free communion between God and man. But the sin of Adam and Eve separated earth from heaven so that man could not have communion with his Maker. Yet the world was not left in solitary helplessness. The ladder represents Jesus, the appointed medium of communication. Had he not with his own merits bridged the gulf that sin had made, the ministering angels could have held no communion with fallen man. Christ connects man in his weakness and helplessness with the source of infinite power. Although there is a perfect fulfillment of this predicted event, brothers and sisters, but Sister White applied it first on spiritual aspect. But we need to focus our attention to the statement given by the shepherd's rod. The dream of Jacob is pointing to some future event. 1 SR page 61. And in 2 SR 266 it says, Jacob's dream is prophetic. And in 1 SR Pocket Edition, page 33 and page 34, the shepherd's rod connect in that dream of Jacob to Hosea chapter 2, verse 21. So, we need to read another statement in the shepherd's rod concerning Hosea 2, verse 21. Now, here in track number 4, on page 48, it says, Hosea 2 verse 21. It is entitled, Take Charge of the Flock. So let's read the statement here. And it shall come to pass in that day, I will hear, saith the Lord, I will hear the heavens, and they shall hear the earth. Hosea 2 verse 21. And it says, while the praise, I will hear the heavens, shows that he is on the earth. So Jesus Christ is on the earth. The praise, they shall hear the earth, shows that by means of the angels, there shall be constant communication between heaven and earth. So let us read again. Track number 4, page 48 and page 49. It says, while the praise, I will hear the heavens, shows that he is on the earth. The praise, they shall hear the earth, shows that by means of the angels, there will be constant communication between heaven and earth. Track number 4, page 48 and page 49. Now, let's read another statement in the voice of inspiration. It says here, track number 4, page 14 and page 15. And then let us go to 2TG number 6, page 24. In 2TG number 6, page 24, it says, in saying that the Lord will hear the heavens and the heavens the earth, inspiration actually says that when these things take place on earth, the Lord is to be in the midst of His people, that He is to speak from earth, and His subjects in heaven shall hear Him. I would like to read again. 2TG number 6, page 24. In saying that the Lord will hear the heavens, and the heavens the earth, inspiration actually says that when these things take place on earth, the Lord is to be in the midst of His people, that He is to speak from earth, and His subjects in heaven shall hear Him. 2TG number 6, page 24. Track number 4, page 14 and page 15. So, track number 4, page 14 and page 15. It says, these verses describe the latter-day state of the once fallen wife, the church, as one of unadulterated purity and absolute safety. But as she is at the present time still in her Laodicean condition, wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked, still impure and still in danger, it is evident that as Hosea's vision extends over the entire length of the Jewish church, is also extend over the entire length of the Christian church. From the crucifixion, that is in April 16, 31 AD, from the crucifixion to her fast approaching liberation from bondage. Fast approaching liberation from bondage, when the Lord is to hear the heavens, and the heavens are to hear the earth. Track number 4, page 14 and page 15. Now, let us read, I think, 1SR. 228. One SR page 228. It was Jacob who in the night on the way to Padam Aram had a dream of the great ladder which reached from earth to heaven, and the angels of God ascended and descended upon it. This vision was a representation of the latter rain, and the loud cry of the third angel's message in the time of harvest. The ladder representing Christ, the angels, the messengers, God the Father at one end, and Jacob at the other, meaning a complete connection with heaven and earth. Though the duration of this last section of provisionary time, entitled Israel, is shorter than any of the periods before it, it is to be the most glorious time of God's church. The prophet Isaiah, looking forward to this time, says, "Awake, awake, put on the strength of Zion, put on the beautiful garments of Jerusalem, the holy city, for henceforth there shall no more come unto thee the uncircumcised and the unclean." Never before this time in view has God's church been kept entirely free from the unconsecrated and unconverted, tails uncircumcised and unclean in the midst of her. But now the time has come where He must purify His church and keep her as such. Zephaniah, referring to this time, says, "The remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity, nor speak lies." Zephaniah 3, verse 13. Now let us ponder deeply those passages that we already read, brothers and sisters. The voice of inspiration is plainly telling us that this dream of Jacob was given by God to him on the very first night when he left his father's house. I would like to read again 1 TG 47 on page 15. It says here, 1 TG number 47 on page 15. It says, that which happened to Jacob is sure to happen to us. And how comforting to know all this ahead of time. That which happened to Jacob is sure to happen to us. And how comforting to know all this ahead of time. Now, where is the duplicate of the life of Jacob when he left his father's house? Where is that duplicate, brethren? I would like to read again the statement in page 68 in 1 SR. The fact that Israel after the flesh is a type photograph, their experience must be duplicated by the truth. Otherwise, there can be no type. Now, the shepherd's rod made it so plain. That which happened to Jacob is sure to happen to us. Now, if it is sure to happen to us, where is that duplicate of the life of Jacob when he left his father's house? First of all, brothers and sisters, we need to understand that the age of God's people, there is a close connection to the prophecy. For example, here in 1 SR, let me read to you the statement given by the shepherd's rod. Here in 1 SR, on page 54, it says, coming back to our subject, Esau and Jacob, whatever the lessons of these twins, it cannot apply to the Old Testament church. For if Isaac is the father of them and represents the New Testament church, then the lesson must apply to the church represented by him. If the father was 60 years of age at the time Esau and Jacob were born, the lesson cannot be for the early part of the church. The symbol must be for a later period. So the age of those type was included by the shepherd's rod. Now, for example, concerning Jacob, brothers and sisters, Jacob was 77 years old when he left his father's house. And we know number 7 indicates completeness. It seems that there is parallelism with the 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Jacob was 77 years old when he left his father's house, brothers and sisters. According to the history, it says, I would like to read Halley's Bible Handbook, the history. Jacob was 77 years old at this time. He was 15 when Abraham died. Jacob was 84 years old when he married. 90 when Joseph was born. 98 when he returned to Canaan. 120 when Isaac died. 130 when he went to Egypt. 147 when he died. His first 77 years were spent in Canaan. Now, think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. Why is it that Jacob was 77 years old when he left his father's house? The shepherd's rod connect the subject of the woman to the life of Jacob. That only in the life of Jacob we find the type for it when the woman left the vineyard. The vineyard is Palestine, the land of Canaan. And we already read, Jacob spent 77 years in Canaan, in the homeland, in his father's house, because his father is Isaac, and Isaac never went into Egypt. Brothers and sisters, that is very plain. Now, the word counterparts in track number 14, page 6, it seems that in the antitype being more broader in scale, it was separated, brothers and sisters. Some of the events are already in the past, but some of the events were still unfulfilled. Now, I would like to connect our subject on Matthew chapter 20. Let me read to you. In White House Recruiter on page 15, it says, "The truth is now become clear that the parable divides the time of salvation into two equal parts of 12 symbolical hours each. The period before the Bible, the night, and the period during the Bible, the day. Lending the additional force to the fact that the parable thus divides time, Jesus declares, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk during the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world." John 11, verse 9. I would like to emphasize, brothers and sisters, that the shepherd's rod plainly told us here in track number 15. I would like to read it, page 78. It says, "From the aforementioned examples, we already see that the time has come for all faithful Bible students after saving truth, to realize that inspiration never does anything vain or careless. Its work is ever accurately constructed, always dependable at face value, and explicit beyond improvement." And the statement in 1 SR 244. It says, "It is wonderful to note the inspiration of the Scriptures. Perfect they are when their appointed time is come. Only at such an occasion are the scriptures grammatically correct. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. That if that is the appointed time, that is the only time by which the scriptures are grammatically correct. Now, I would like to prove that what the shepherd's rod teaches is absolutely correct. I would like to quote that statement in 1 TG number 13, page 7. It says, our duty is to prove God's word correct rather than to hold tenaciously to our preconceptions and misconceptions until God himself steps in and put us to shame. It says, our duty is to prove God's word correct rather than to hold tenaciously to our preconception and misconceptions until God himself steps in and put us to shame. And since I fully believe that the shepherd's rod are the words of God, because it is called the rod of God, right? Exodus 4 verse 20 and 21. And since it is the word of God, my duty is to prove that whatever written in the shepherd's rod, it is correct. But always apply the principle, the divine principle, as given unto us by Sister White and B.T. Hotep in 7 Symbolic Code 7 to 12, page 19. 7 Symbolic Code 7 to 12, page 19, saying, we have learned much, and no doubt there is much more for us to learn. It is the follow-on and the go-through spirit that will finally land the remnant without fault on the heavenly Mount Zion. My conclusion is that we should give up no scripture truth, but that our false applications and interpretation of scripture and consequent false ideas of order and propriety should be given up as fast as possible. 7 Symbolic Code 7 to 12, page 19. But I would like to use the term false expectation. But the shepherd's rod used the term false application. But I would like to use the term primary application. If the application made does not exactly fits to the statement itself, that is not the perfect fulfillment of the prophecy. That is the groundwork. That is the primary application, not the perfect application, the final application. Now, since the shepherd's rod made it so plain here in White House Recruiter, page 15, the truth is now become clear that the parable divides the time of salvation into two equal parts of 12 symbolical hours each. The word equal meaning even. Exactly 12 hours in the night time, exactly 12 hours on the daylight. And that what it means by vernal equinox. The vernal equinox, it is when the night and day, or the day and night, are absolutely equal. And I would like to say that it is falsely science so-called that every year there is vernal equinox. No, there is no vernal equinox. That is spring equinox. Because if you look at the so-called vernal equinox March 20, either March 21, the night and day are not equal. That is spring equinox rather than vernal equinox. Erroneously called vernal equinox. And it is closely connected to our subject, going out of Egypt. Because that is the time by which the night and day are equal. Now, let us read answerer. Here in answerer number 3, pages 10 and page 11, it says, to prevent his people from bringing upon themselves such a catastrophe, and to have them intelligent as to the time the year begins, the Lord gave to Moses the sacred yearly calendar, which cannot be lost or miscalculated, so long as the earth remains. He told him that the day which preceded the Exodus was the 14th day of the first month, and that forever thereafter they were to commemorate the Passover on the very night each year, the night following the 14th day. Thus was the Lord re-establishing the creation calendar, reaffirming that the year begins on the day of the vernal equinox, on which spring, the first season of the year, commences, and on which the sun and the moon were created, the 4th day from the beginning of creation. The only point in time at which in the very nature of things the year could begin. And so it is that the Passover, the Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, the 3 most important feasts in the year, besides other feasts, are controlled by the solar year and by the lunar month, the weekly Sabbath by the day on which creation began, and the year itself by the vernal equinox, the immovable signpost. So that is very plain here in answerer number 3, page 10 and 11. I know, brothers and sisters, you might be wondering why our subject is taken from one subject to the other, because we are already in the final touch. The shepherd's rod says that one truth dovetailing another. It says this in track number 5. Let me read to you. It says in page 38, going on now to understand the symbolism as it thus basically defines itself, the student will see as he proceeds that each subject not only becomes clearer and clearer, one truth dovetailing with another and all reinforcing the whole, but also that it holds a steering present truth lesson. Or in 2SR 255, it says, one thing proves another. Right? 2SR 255. I would like to read this reading. It says, so again, we find that one thing proves another. And as a whole, brothers and sisters, they were in perfect harmony. That is the plan of redemption. That is the Bible. Right? The shepherd's rod says in track number 5 on page 36, it says, just as the alphabet lends itself to the fabrication of words, phrases, and sentences into a predetermined pattern of thought, sustained and coherent, likewise the Bible, when made wholly self-defining, marvelously builds its richly varied materials through types, symbols, parables, allegories, numerics, etc., into a towering revelation foreordained of perfectly coordinated life-saving truth. Accordingly, as every letter, every word, and every phrase of a sentence has its appointed part to play in giving coherent expression to the thought intended, just so has every scripture its appointed part in unfolding Bible truths, when each is carefully joined in its right relation in the picture of revealed truth, one leading on to and illuminating another. The great overall designs stands out in all the solemn majesty of its mountainous finality and grandeur. And that's what we are doing, brothers and sisters. We are connecting one subject to the other. I remember that statement. Let me see if I could find that statement. It is also the same. Written by Alonzo Jones. Let me see, brothers and sisters. And give us admonition that to get the full beam of light of the entire plan of redemption, we need now to connect every subject, because we are now in the climactic hour, brothers and sisters. And it's very important to have familiarity from one subject to the other. Otherwise, we will find difficulty, brothers and sisters, to comprehend the entire subject. Let me see if I can find that statement. That admonition given by the voice of inspiration. We need to connect one subject to the other, brothers and sisters. Or in other words, in all angles. I think that is in 1SR Packet Edition, by which the Shepherd says to connect on different angles. But at this time, I would like to use the term in all angles. Not only different angles, but if possible, in all angles of the prophecy. I would like to read that 1SR Packet Edition. It says here, 1SR Packet Edition, page 10 and page 11. And also in, let me see what the statement says. But how can we know for sure? Another questions that this and companion publications are the genuine fruit of the unrolling of the scroll and of the sealing angel and of the sealing angel's arrival. Simply, if the claimant herein on trial is vindicated by all relevant scripture and other inspired testimony. So, all relevant scripture, brothers and sisters, or the subject must be explained into different angles, and if possible, in all angles of the prophecy. And that's what we are doing now in this very important subject. Now, I would like to read 1SR 124, then go back to that reading in White House Recruiter, page 15. 1SR, page 124. It says, the picture tells the story. Symbols do not lie. So the picture tells the story. Symbols do not lie. And secondly, in track number 3, page 65, it says, track number 3, page 65, it says, do not regard lightly the wisdom of God. His illustrations are perfect. Now, I would like to emphasize the illustration of the woman, that the woman had given 2 wings of a great eagle. Have you been able to see wings which is not fair? Or the measurement of the other wing is smaller than the other wing, or the other wing is bigger than the other. Every one of us says there is no such thing. So if Christ's illustrations are perfect, that the woman had given 2 wings, that she might fly into the wilderness, the 2 wings represents period of time. And since the wings always pair, so it must be equal periods of time. 2 periods of time by which both of them must be equal, because that is the illustration of the wings. Symbols do not lie. Now, let us read 2SR. If the application made primarily does not exactly fits to the illustration, then that is not the perfect fulfillment of the prophecy. Now, here it says in 2SR, let us read. (142). 2SR 142, it says, therefore, she was given the wings to fly into the wilderness in the New Testament time. So when the woman is already in the wilderness, she has already the 2 wings. Because that is the purpose by which the woman was given 2 wings, in order to fly into the wilderness. And it says, in the New Testament era. Now, I would like to read again. Therefore, she was given the wings to fly into the wilderness in the New Testament time. Now, here in page 141, 2SR 141, it says, we again call your attention to the woman, church, of Revelation 12, where we are told she was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, that they should feed there 1,260 days, verse 14 and 6. As the wings of the lion, Babylon, and the 4-headed leopard, Grecian 4 division, Daniel 7, verse 4 and 6, represents periods of world history, see pages 33 to 42. So the wings of the woman also must denote 2 great periods of church history. 2 great periods of church history. The eagle being the king of birds, his wings must stand for chief, head, or first. Therefore, each wing must be symbol of one of these 2 great periods from their very beginning. Both of them is first. To repeat again, brothers and sisters, symbols do not lie. The picture tells the story. And if Christ's illustrations are perfect, there must be a perfect significance of the 2 wings of an eagle that was given by God to the woman. And it says, it represents 2 great periods of time by which each of the wing represent first. It can't represent that the other wing is first and the other wing is second. No, both of them are first. But the absolute fact is that it must be equal, because wings always equal. There is no such eagle by which her wings are not equal, brothers and sisters. And it is closely connected also to the subject we read concerning the 24 hours by which divided into two equal parts of 12 hours, and that is vernal equinox, by which the night and the day are equal. The immovable signpost, according to answerer number 3, page 11, right? The immovable signpost. Now let us focus first to the woman that had been given 2 wings of an eagle, great eagle, by which the purpose that she might fly into the wilderness. Therefore, the woman could not be in the wilderness not until she had been given 2 wings of an eagle. Or in other words, the perfect fulfillment of Revelation chapter 12 must be to the time when these 2 great periods of time had been ended. In the actuality, the word given meaning the 2 periods of time had been ended. And after the 2 great periods of time had been ended, then the woman is in the wilderness. We already read, brothers and sisters, then the shepherd's rod is emphasizing. I would like to read again. In 12 symbolic code number 6 and 7, on page 7. Though some may understand that the church was to be in the wilderness only for the duration of the prophetic 1,260 days, it should be pointed out that Revelation does not say that. The Revelation only says that the woman was to be feed in the wilderness 1,260 days. It does not say how long she would be there. Her warfare was to be in the wilderness. By the authority of other scriptures, prophecies in conjunction with Revelation chapter 12, we have learned that when her warfare is finished, she is to journey out of the wilderness and return to the vineyard kingdom, which God is to restore unto her. We believe we are now approaching that very event, when God's people must return and reestablish the vineyard, God's kingdom, that is to constitute the stone of Daniel 2 verse 44 and 45. 12 symbolic code number 6 and 7, page 7. Or in other words, the shepherd's rod is trying to emphasize that most Bible students, they thought the 1,260 years that occurred in 538 AD to 1798 AD, that is the only predicted event that the woman will be in the wilderness. Well, the Bible does not say that. Because in connection to Zechariah chapter 6 verse 8, I would like to emphasize again. Zechariah chapter 6 verses 1 to 8, if you will look unto your own chart given by B.T. Hotep, you can immediately see the church to the wilderness and the church back from the wilderness. To repeat over and over again, it says, her prophetic history by unmistakable symbols. Unmistakable symbols. To repeat over and over again, Zechariah chapter 6, that symbolical prophecy must find its fulfillment in the Christian era. Because brass represent the numerical value of number 3. Now let us read again the statement in track number 2, page 13. So, being of brass, the mountains denote that the church which they symbolize is in period number 3. And the fact that there is a third period presupposes 2 preceding periods, making in all 3 great divisions of time, the first from creation to the flood, the second from the flood to the crucifixion of Christ, and the third from the crucifixion to His second coming. The Christian era is therefore the one to which the symbolical mountain of brass apply. Track number 2, page 13. Therefore, the fulfillment of Zechariah chapter 6, verses 1 to 8 must found in the Christian era. So that statement, the church to the wilderness and the church back from the wilderness, brothers and sisters, to repeat again, the word back can only be applied second time or third time. And the shepherd's rod definitely declared that the woman in the New Testament time, let us read again, 2SR page 76, John's vision in the 12th chapter of Revelation deals with 2 main subjects, namely the woman clothed with the sun and the red dragon. The latter has been explained. See pages 65 to 69. The symbol of the woman in the New Testament time covers 3 divisions. The first division is the apostolic period, that is in 27 AD to 100 AD. Second, her absence from civilization in the wilderness for 1,260 days, years of papal persecution, verses 6 and 14. Third, the last period of the church while in conflict with the dragon. So that is the last period of the woman, while in conflict of the dragon. And the Bible says, according to the shepherd's rod, 12 symbolic code 6 and 7, page 7, her warfare was to be in the wilderness. The church to the wilderness during the Dark Ages, that is out of civilization. What does it mean by out of civilization? In 2SR page 261, it means that, brothers and sisters, the dragon had not been able to find out the location of the woman because the woman was miraculously hidden by God. Then there is no possibility that the woman is in conflict with the dragon during the Dark Ages. How about Lutherans, Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist? Are they not woman? They were in conflict with the dragon. But the fact is, they were not represented by the woman. I would like to read first to SR 261. It says, the wilderness represents the Dark Ages in which time she was out of civilization. The woman is out of civilization at that time, during the Dark Ages. Now, the shepherd's rod plainly declared, brothers and sisters, that how about the reformers? Are they not women? Now let us read. Because they were in conflict with the dragon during the Dark Ages. Let us read 267 in 2SR. If the accepted interpretation of the woman is a symbol of the church, and if she was in the wilderness from 538 AD to 1798 AD, which is out of civilization, nobody knows where she was hidden. What about the 4 great denominations that were raised up prior to that time? Namely Lutherans, Presbyterian, Methodist, and Christian. Were they not the woman? The answer is found in 268. It says, The foregoing explanations answer one of our questions. The Protestant churches, which were raised up before the woman returned from the wilderness, were in total darkness concerning the sanctuary service. Therefore, they are not represented by the woman or by the temple. Lutherans, Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, no, they are not the woman, but rather, they are the little help sent by God to the woman to protect the woman, so that the woman, brothers and sisters, the location of the woman will not be, or the devil could not found the location of the woman. Or in other words, the purpose of that Reformation, Lutherans, Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, God raised that Reformation called by inspiration as a little help to divert the attention of the dragon, because the dragon is following the woman in the wilderness. The dragon wants to destroy the woman. It says here in tract number 15, let me read. On page 85, unquestionably therefore, the wilderness where the woman was nourished for the time being is the land of the Gentiles, and the woman having to flee from the face of the serpent in her homeland shows that the dragon had made the Holy Land his headquarters. Not satisfied with this, though he even followed her into the wilderness. Or in other words, the devil followed the woman in the wilderness. The dragon wants to find the location of the woman. The situation is the same on the birth of Jesus Christ, right? The woman is Mary, the biological mother of Jesus Christ. And Herod says that if you will find the location where the child was born, talking about the three Magi, go back to me and tell me. But Herod is under the spirit of the dragon. He wants to destroy the child. And that is God. God told Joseph and Mary to leave that place. And they went to Egypt, brothers and sisters. And that is the same. During the Dark Ages, the dragon is trying to locate the location of the woman. The woman was miraculously hidden by God. According to tract number 12, I would like to read that reading in tract number 12, page 43. So had he not nourished her, tract number 12, page 43, so had he not nourished her, keep her in existence by a miracle, the church would have perished during those dark ages of religion. And the Reformation, according to tract number 12, on page 80, it says, Daniel 11, verse 33 and 34. These verses, besides foreshadowing the martyrdom of the faithful followers of Christ, predict the Reformation, the little help, and foretell that its present fallen state is caused by flatteries. So the Reformation, those reformers that had been raised by God during the dark ages of religion, while Jesus Christ is hiding the location of the woman, at the same time, God raised up these reformers, Luther, or Martin Luther, Knox, Wesley Campbell, or all the reformers, to divert the attention of the dragon. They sacrificed their lives, brothers and sisters, just to divert the attention of the dragon. They sacrifice their lives, and they are the little help sent by God to protect the woman. Now, let us go back again to our subject, brothers and sisters. The focal point of Revelation chapter 12 is not the occurrence during the Dark Ages. First, Revelation chapter 12, brothers and sisters, is a part of the seventh seal, 2TG 1231. The seventh seal contained 15 chapters long, 2TG 1231. Track 15, page 10, the seventh seal begins on chapter 8 and ends on chapter 22. Therefore, chapter 12 is a part of the seventh seal. And secondly, the promise was 2TG 1230. Moreover, the revelation is to be more fully understood during the judgment that pertains to the living. Therefore, the particular object in view in the book of Revelation must be in the judgment that pertains to the living. As a matter of fact, according to 2SR 111, the people in the generation during the Dark Ages, they had no understanding concerning the writings, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Because in that period of time, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation was sealed. 2TG number 7, page 3. The understanding was not given to them. And the shepherd's rod made it so plain in 3 symbolic code 8 to 10, page 8, that in more specific terms, the time of the end began in the year 1844. The same with the statement in 2SR page 191, that the word hereafter pointing forward to 1844. Therefore, the particular object in view must be from 1844 onwards. And even in the parable of Matthew 20, to prove to you that that statement in White House Recruiter, page 15, does not exactly fit to the application made by B.T. Hotep. And B.T. Hotep himself says in 7 symbolic code 7 to 12, page 19, we should not give up scriptural truth, but our false application. At the time when the scroll will be unrolled, should be given up as fast as possible. Now, the application made on the primary application is that the period represented by the night, that was from Adam, from 4,000 BC up to the time when Moses began to write the Bible in the wilderness. But that period of time is 2,513 years or 2,514 years, according to the shepherd's rod. Or if you will go to the Great Controversy, page 5, introduction, page 5, it says, during the 2,500 years, there was no written revelation. So in that reading, there are 2,500 years, there was no written revelation. Now, from the time when the Bible began to be written, up to this present time, more than 3,000 years. Would you think 2,500 and 3,500 are equal? But the statement says in White House Recruiter, page 15, 24 hours divided into 2 equal parts. There was no 24 hours in Matthew 20. The 24 hours is found in Revelation 6, verse 6. And it is equal, right? The chapter is 6 and the verse is 6. And it is also pointing to the Bible, the 66 books of the Bible. So if you could understand Revelation 6, verse 6 completely, That is the entire plan of redemption. Now, let me read to you here in 2SR. 200. 2SR page 236. The evidence brought forth shows that the calls, messages before Israel went out of Egypt were not included in the parable, and that the call of Israel was early in the morning. I would like to read again. The evidence brought forth shows that the calls, meaning messages, before Israel went out of Egypt were not included in the parable in Matthew 20. What is the call? Adam, Enoch, and Noah. The first three calls, and that is during the night time. There was no night time in Matthew 20 because the parable in Matthew 20 is only the daylight. The evidence brought forth shows that the calls, messages before Israel went out of Egypt, messages in plural form or calls in plural form. And that is the call in Adam, in Enoch, and Noah. These first three calls that occurred in the night time is not included in the parable in Matthew 20. So, where we could find the 24 hours, that is in Revelation chapter 6, verse 6, not in Matthew 20. To repeat again, the chapter and the verse itself, both are equal. Vernal equinox. Chapter 6, then verse 6. The Bible, 66 books. The entire plan of redemption divided into two equal parts. Let me read to you 1 TG. Number 10. Page 18. The Bible contains the complete plan of salvation for all humanity. How do I know this? I know it because its story begins with creation and ends with the earth made new. Between the first and the last pages of the Bible, then lies the complete formula for man's salvation and redemption. And if such revival and reformation as here envisioned is to take place in the world between these two events, creation and the new earth, then the material and example of such a work must be found somewhere in the pages of the Bible. But I would like only to focus to the statement that the Bible contains the complete formula of the plan of salvation. And the plan of salvation is divided into two equal parts. Let's go back again in page 15. The truth is now become clear that the parable divides the time of salvation into two equal parts of 12 symbolical hours each, the period before the Bible, the night, and the period during the Bible, the day, lending additional force to the fact that the parable thus divides times. Jesus declares, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk during the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of the world." John 11, verse 9. The time of salvation divided into two equal parts. The illustration in Matthew 20 and also the illustration of the woman given two wings of an eagle is the same, because wings always comes equal, fair. It is closely connected, brothers and sisters. And to repeat again, I would like to read 2SR 200 25 and 226. With the previous explanation of Revelation 6 verse 6, a measure of wheat for a penny and the 3 measures of barley for a penny, we shall endeavor to prove that the symbols point back to the parable of the householder, and Jesus allegorically looked forward to John's vision. So the shepherds had made it so plain that when Jesus Christ gave the parable to the disciples concerning the parable of the householder in Matthew 20, allegorically, Jesus Christ is looking forward when he will show the vision to John in the island of Patmos concerning the third seal, because Revelation 6 verse 6 is the third seal. And closely connected to Acts 3 verse 19 and 20. When the proceedings of the third seal is occurring in the heavenly sanctuary. Now, I would like to read again. It says, if the explanation perfectly fits the parable and the vision in harmony with God's book and law, and a present truth lesson is derived therefrom, then only must we accept it as truth. So the shepherd says, if the explanation perfectly fits the parable, if the explanation perfectly fits the parable, not only the parable, as well as the vision in Revelation 6 verse 6, in harmony with God's book and law, and a present truth lesson is derived therefrom, then only must we accept it as truth. So there is a divine explanation concerning the parable in connection with the vision. Now, the shepherd says, the parable divides the time of salvation into 2 equal parts, and it was illustrated by the vision, Revelation 6 verse 6, equal. Chapter 6, the same number, 6 and 6. Why is it that God did not use 77? Because number 7 indicates completeness. Why is it that God used 66? 66 books rather than 77 books. The Roman Catholic Church, they emphasize that the only complete Bible is the Catholic Bible because their Bible contains 76 books. They emphasize that the Catholic Bible is the complete Bible. But we know that is not the case. It seems plausible, right? The Catholic Bible contains 76 books to indicate that the Catholic Bible is the complete Bible. Because the Bible of the Christians are only 66 books. Number 6 is incomplete. But there must be an absolute significance why God used only 66 books to represent His words, the Bible. First of all, Jesus Christ died on the cross on the 6th day, Friday. And in Bible calendar, 31 AD is pattern number 6. Jesus Christ died on the cross on Friday, the 6th day, and that was on pattern number 6, 31 AD. And the name Israel contained only 6 letters, right? I would like to read 1SR. Here in 1SR, 233, it says, Israel is spelled with 6 letters. Had this name been more or less, it would spoil the picture. Why? Because the 6 letters indicate the 6th section, Israel the true. The 144,000 are sealed at the close of the 5th section. So the 144,000, they are sealed at the close of the 5th section. So the sealing of the 144,000 will be at the closing of the 5th section. And when the 5th section closes, the 144,000 are completely sealed. Had the name been of 7 letters, it would denote close of provision instead of beginning of harvest. Israel, in the time of harvest, will receive a new name by the mouth of the Lord. Isaiah 62 verse 2. Whatever that name may be, we are sure it will be perfect to finish the picture of provisionary time, as well as to indicate the end of all the redeemed or close of provision. Woe to him whom you think all these wonderful designs in the beauty of perfection are just a chance or an accident. Such a one is denying the master mechanic of all creation. He is paying homage to evolution. Chance. Now, what is that section entitled Israel represented? The fulfillment of the dream of Jacob. Now, let's go back to 228. It says, though it was Jacob who in the night on the way to Padam Aram, 1SR 228. It was Jacob who in the night on the way to Padam Aram had the dream of the great ladder which reached from earth to heaven, and the angels of God ascended and descended upon it. This vision was our presentation of the latter rain and the loud cry of the third angel's message in the time of harvest. The ladder representing Christ, the angels, the messengers, God the Father at one end and Jacob at the other, meaning a complete connection with heaven and earth. Though the duration of this last section of provisionary time, entitled Israel, is shorter than any of the periods before it, it is to be the most glorious time of God's church. The prophet Isaiah, looking forward to this time, says, awake, awake, put on the strength of Zion. So the last section of provisionary time, not the provisionary time through the entire world, because we already read in 1SR 233 that Israel is spelled only 6 letters, indicate that it could not be, pointing to the general clause of provision. And, of course, the name Israel must be applied only to the church. The Shepherd's Rod declared clearly in 1 TG, number 3. On page 12, it says, even an altogether uninformed Christian knows that the terms Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel mean the church, never even as much as imply the world. They have always meant the church and always will mean the church, for that is what they are. 1 TG number 3, page 12. So the term Israel must be applied only to the church. So the statement, last section of provisionary time to the church. And it is the time by which the dream of Jacob will find its fulfillment, according to this reading, in 1SR 228. Brothers and sisters, we need to study closely this very important prophecy. This is our first episode concerning the 144,000 going out of Egypt. And in this study, we will prove to you that God has graciously placed in our hands the definite time by which we need to abandon Egypt. We need to prepare for that event. And how could we prepare for that event if we did not know? Here it says in 1SR page 64, this experience of the Israelites in departing from Egypt was written for the instruction of those who should live in the last days. Before the overflowing scourge shall come upon the dwellers of the earth, the Lord calls upon all who are Israelites indeed to prepare for that event. We need to prepare for that event. Brothers and sisters. And that event will occur, brothers and sisters, on the year 2020 and 2021. But in order to understand, brothers and sisters, we need to study closely. And we will prove to you that the very year 2020 and 2021 is the predicted event by which God commanded His people to prepare for that event. To abandon Egypt. So that predicted event by which B.T. Hotep says is still the future in his days. We are now coming face to face, brothers and sisters, to that event. Here in Old Symbolic Code, I would like to read to you. Three Symbolic Code, 11 to 12, page 12. 3 Symbolic Code, 11 to 12, page 12. And by a prophet, the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. It says, the call to ancient Israel was a call to come out of Egypt and into the promised Canaan. The call to modern Israel is a call to come out of antitypical Egypt and into the heavenly Canaan. 3 Symbolic Code, 11 to 12, page 12. And by a prophet, the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved. Would you think the prophet mentioned here is a dead prophet? The focal point of the prophecy is the 144,000. According to our reading in 1SR 101. And the constituent of the 144,000 living saints did not yet even born in the days of B.T. Hotep. And secondly, if you will only honestly and sincerely study the Bible, this for prophecy, in the light of the Shepherd's Rod publications, you can immediately discern that both Sister White and B.T. Hotep were living in a period of time by which they were still in Egypt. Although they were still in Egypt, the same with the type, historically, there are faithful people of God by which even though that they were still in the dominion of Egypt, they lived unspotted with the spirit of Egypt. They were spiritually out of Egypt, according to the voice of inspiration. But the fact is, we are looking to that period of time, that duplicate, by which God called Israel out of Egypt, physically. And Bethlehem says that that fulfillment, the perfect fulfillment of that predicted event, was still future in his days. 2SR 275. Brothers and sisters. And the reason that God take his people from Egypt, because at that time, the Pharaoh that reigned in Egypt no longer recognized Joseph. Unlike in the time when Joseph was still alive. What is the description in Answerer? They live as kings and princes. I think that is the statement in Answerer number 2. The people of God at that time, when Joseph was still alive, brothers and sisters, I would like to read to you Answerer number 2, page 6. Thus the Lord providentially exalted Joseph to share the throne in Egypt in order to predispose Pharaoh to grant Israel permission to enter into the land. Next, to draw them there, he brought thereabouts the 7 years of plenty, followed by the 7 years of famine. Whereupon he sent word to Jacob that Joseph was yet alive. At the overjoying news, there sprang up in the father an irresistible desire to see his son. This and the life-taking hunger upon Joseph's brethren compelled them to remove into Pharaoh's land of plenty, where they live like kings. So, they live like kings, or in other words, I think, the life in the days of Sister White and B.T. Hotep, and in the time in which we are living in, there is quite difference. The America in the days of Sister White and B.T. Hotep and the America today. Because that's what the Bible teaches, because America is the land of Goshen. According to the Shepherd's Rod in 1SR page 76, the land of Goshen stands as a symbol of the United States of America, in which the church came into existence. So, there is a quite difference. The land of Goshen, in the time when the Pharaoh that reigned in the land of Goshen recognizes Joseph, they live as princes and kings. But there was a time by which the Pharaoh that reigned in Egypt no longer recognized Joseph. So if the land of Goshen stands as a symbol in the United States of America, the America in the days of Sister White and B.T. Hotep is no longer the America in our days. Whether you realize it or not, that is the absolute fact, brothers and sisters. So to repeat again, we will try our very best on the next episode that we could be able to give you in details all the necessary information to prove that we are now living in a time that God is giving this message unto us for the reason that the time of our deliverance from the Egyptian bondage is no longer far distant. Brothers and sisters, according to the Shepherd's Rod, right? In track number 4, page 14 and page 15, liberation from bondage is fast approaching, brethren. It says, I would like to read track number 4, 14 and 15. It also extends over the entire length of the Christian church from the crucifixion to her fast approaching liberation from bondage. When the Lord is to hear the heavens and the heavens are to hear the earth, what does it mean? When Jesus Christ will visit the earth. Because it was already declared in page 48 that statement saying, while the praise I will hear the heavens shows that Christ is on the earth, the praise they shall hear the earth shows that by the means of angels there will be constant communication between heaven and earth. Brothers and sisters, so the statement, fast approaching liberation from bondage, it is at the time when the Lord is to visit us. Right? Are we among that people by which God declared, I hear, right? In Exodus chapter 3. Or are we satisfied, brothers and sisters, in Egypt? I would like to read this reading. Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land, and a large unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. But we know that God's purpose had not been fulfilled in that occurrence. Israel did not fulfill God's purpose, right? Prophets and Kings, page 19. It says, ancient Israel did not fulfill God's purpose. It says here. Let us read in Prophets and Kings, page 19. But ancient Israel did not fulfill God's purpose. Now, I would like to read Prophets and Kings 713 and 714. That which God purposed to do for the world through Israel, the chosen nation, He will finally accomplish through His church on earth today. He has let out His vineyard unto other husbandmen, even to His covenant-keeping people, who faithfully render Him the fruits in their seasons. Never has the Lord been without true representatives on this earth, who have made His interest their own. These witnesses for God are numbered among the spiritual Israel. And we are the spiritual Israel, brethren. And to them will be fulfilled all the covenant promises made by Jehovah to His ancient people. All the covenant promises made by Jehovah to His ancient people will finally fulfilled through the spiritual Israel. In 720, in Prophets and Kings, it says, then it is that the redeemed from among men, that is the 144,000 living saints, then it is that the redeemed from among men will receive their promised inheritance. Thus God's purpose for Israel will meet with literal fulfillment. That which God purposes, man is powerless to disannul. Even amid the working of evil, God's purposes had been moving steadily forward to their accomplishment. It was thus with the house of Israel throughout the history of a divided monarchy. It is thus with spiritual Israel today. Prophets and Kings 720. Brethren, we are about time, brothers and sisters, to enter the promised land. This message, in reality, is not against you, brothers and sisters. I remember that reading in SR page 258. It says, my brethren, these words are not against you. No, these messages are not against Shepherd's Rod believer. It is a message, brothers and sisters, to let all Shepherd's Rod believers that our long and trying journey is about an end. We are homeward bound to the kingdom. Brothers and sisters, let us, as a Shepherd's Rod believer, sit down and study closely, honestly, what the Bible says as the Shepherd's Rod explains. It says here, my brethren, these words are not against you, for it is God speaking through His word of truth to save you from the bottomless pit. Will you not let Him work for you and for His people? Will you not be His sheep? Well, for worse or for better. What is that statement in White House Recruiter, page 45? It says, for worse or for better, brethren, you are now in the blessing light of God's word, left to make your own decision, whatever it be, though you will never have a just cause either to exalt or to blame another for it. The responsibility is now entirely yours. Life is but what we make it. So hoping that you will continue listening to this message, brothers and sisters. And we guaranteed that we will never teach anything that it is not written in the words of inspiration. The only word that we will preach is the word it is written. Because that is the divine command, right? In Testimonies, Volume 6, it says, only the word it is written that we need to preach, brothers and sisters. And that is the only message that we are going to teach. The word it is written. Here it says, in Volume 6, page 19, the word of truth, it is written, is the gospel we are to preach. Volume 6, page 19, the word of truth, it is written, is the gospel we are to preach. We will continue this subject, brothers and sisters, and hoping the good Lord will bless you and would help you and inspire you with a holy zeal to continue to search and to follow and listen to this program. Thank you very much. May the good Lord bless you and have a wonderful evening.